Hieronymus should have been sitting at the head of the table, not Aloysius, but it wasn't like I was actually in any position to object. "How are you enjoying the food, Tori?" Aloysius asks. "I'm quite sure you've never had craddock before. It's one of my favorites." "It's very good," I reply, and then, trying to seem cultured, "It's not as tender as squab, but it's good." Aloysius raises an eyebrow, and even Hieronymus seems surprised. "You've had squab?" "Not very often, but yes, I have," I reply. Aloysius nods his head in approval, and I make a mental note to inform Hieronymus later that I never actually have had squab before. That being said, cooking show critiques could, apparently, make an excellent replacement for actual experiences. If you have a sophisticated palate, you'll find that there are many culinary delights to be found in the other world, Aloysius continues, especially after Hieronymus takes up my seat. Englishmen prefer much more cultured foods than just bangers and mash, I assure you. "I can believe it," I say simply, but venture nothing further. "We don't need to have this conversation again," Hieronymus says suddenly. "I told you that we won't give the matter any further consideration until Tori nears her graduation date. She has not yet reached her senior year." "I actually have an interesting offer to propose on that front," Aloysius says as he sets down his fork. "Something I would like to propose to the both of you. Together." "Oh?" Hieronymus arches an eyebrow. "Please, do share." "I disguise it well, but I have been in somewhat frail health these past few years," Aloysius says. Some look passes behind Hieronymus's eyes, but I don't recognize it. "I would very much like to enter retirement, to step back and do all the things I wish I could have done in my youth. I have worked very hard to build our family name, to establish our credibility, and to gain more power than we previously held. I did these things knowing that I would one day pass them on to you." "No, you didn't," Hieronymus snaps. "You did them to establish your own power. This legacy that you keep insisting was done for my benefit would have all been wasted if my circumstances hadn't changed. Over a decade ago, I swore that I would never return." "And I have relieved you of that vow," Aloysius reminds him. I look between them, but stay silent, just mentally taking notes for later. "Tori is young and not yet ready to bear children. I have decided to be understanding of that fact, but I need you to take up my seat. The longer we delay this, the more difficult things will become if there is a power grab in my absence." Hieronymus just shakes his head. "While I understand at least some of your concerns have justification, I am not ready yet. As you've previously said, I am your only son, and that blood right gives me greater claim to the title than any who might wish to usurp it." That was news. Were other people trying to take over in place of Hieronymus? If they were, that would definitely alleviate Hieronymus of some of the burden. Possibly. Or it could potentially make things more difficult later on. I had no idea who these people were. I still wasn't even completely sure what a viscount was supposed to do. "As I've said," Hieronymus continues, "I am not leaving Tori behind. She has 1.5 years left. You can wait that long." "I do not wish to," Aloysius replies, "but I understand that you two are a package deal. That is why I have secured a spot at Miss Minchin's prestigious boarding school for girls in London, should Tori wish to attend." "What?" Hieronymus and I ask at the exact same time. He sounds a lot less shocked than I do, though his voice is dry and flat as a glass of old soda pop. "You want me to go to a fancy English boarding school?" I ask. "Why?" "It would mean you would stay close to Hieronymus," he replies. "It would be close enough that you could still see each other on weekends, if you wished. There are also other girls from prestigious magical families enrolled. You would get a chance to learn more about our family history and what life is like living in England while still finishing up your education. I opened my mouth and shut it, trying to think this over. But my friends can still be your friends, Aloysius finishes for me. Remember that when you graduate in a year or so, your friends are going to go off and live their own lives, Tori. It's important for you to remember to do the same. But I turned to look at Hieronymous, waiting for him to offer another excuse I hadn't thought of yet. Instead, he just sips his wine and sets it down before answering. Well, consider it, he says at length, not looking at me, and my jaw drops open and closes before I drop back down in my seat, defeated. In any case, we could not move until the end of this academic year. Potsdam would be furious if I left over half of her classes without a teacher. She'd manage, Aloysius replies with a slight smirk. That woman is, above all things, capable. It would do you well to keep her on a short leash, though. I don't want to say she's slowly becoming unhinged over the course of these past few years, but her mind isn't what it used to be. She's been keeping your secrets, Hieronymous replies coolly. More wild seeds enter the program each year. More wild seeds leave. No one asks questions. I get the sense that Hieronymous is avoiding my gaze. He doesn't want me to ask questions, but I have to. Why are more wild seeds leaving? I ask hesitantly. Because people think that they can't cut it in the magical community and expel them, or... Aloysius just cackles while Hieronymous looks annoyed. Even still, he's the one who brought it up. I'm sitting right here. If he didn't want me to know anything about what they were discussing, why say anything? Tell her now or tell her later, Hieronymous, Aloysius goads. Or would you like me to tell her? Or do you not trust her enough to keep the secret from her peers? I can keep a secret, Aloysius, I remind him, lowering my voice as I stare him down, and Aloysius's lip quirks up in a smirk. I had kept the secret of our summer rendezvous from Hieronymous for months, and I wasn't quite sure that Hieronymous had ever let slip that I had filled him in on what had transpired during that conversation. That is right. You've said as much before, he muses. But maybe I should enlighten you. After all, you're going to find out eventually, aren't you? That would be my hope, I reply dryly. Hieronymous is looking down now, refusing to meet my eyes, and I have to mentally will myself not to take whatever I'm about to learn out on him later. Tori, let me first begin by asking what you know about students that are expelled from school, he begins. What happens to them? They lose their memories, I reply. Their memories are taken from them so they don't remember how to do magic, and then they're sent back into the world with a clean slate. Yes, we take their memories, but if you recall, the reason we find out about these wild seeds in the first place is because they perform magic accidentally, Aloysius replies. Isn't that how we found you, Tori? Hieronymous looks up in interest now, and I realize we had never had this conversation before. Did Hieronymous even know that story? Aloysius certainly seemed to, but then again, he seemed to know more about me than I knew about myself, at least as far as my magical background was concerned. Yes, I tell him, elaborating on what he already knows. My friends were betting each other on who could climb and hop over an 8-foot fence. When it was my turn, I took a running start and jumped clean over it. Right, Aloysius replies. Easy to pass off as a harmless fluke. But, as I was saying, if a wild seed is expelled and we take their memories, how can we prevent them from casting magic again? I just shake my head. The simplest solution can be the most effective one. If you're worried about them not practicing magic, then the only thing you can do is strip magic away from them entirely so they can't use it anymore. I agree, Aloysius says. It's a rather simple solution. I can't help but frown at him, and they both seem to give me time to put my thoughts together. But that seems wrong, I continue. Magic is something inherent and personal to the user. It doesn't seem right to just take it away from them, even if they can't be trained to use it anymore. But, as you just said, if they're not being trained to use it properly, accidents can happen, Aloysius continues. People can get hurt. But where does it go? I ask. Magic is a form of energy. It can't be created or destroyed, so where does it go? Back to the other world? Or does someone take it? Now she's asking the real questions, Aloysius says as he turns to Hieronymous, who just sighs deeply. It is sold, Tori, Hieronymous says bluntly. It's part of the reason the founding families got to be as powerful as they are. In governance, you will come across individuals who abuse their powers. When the rules get abused too often, you need to make an example of someone. Publicly siphoning air magic and expelling M from the only community they have ever known sets a strong example for others not to suffer the same fate. In that way, magic has become its own resource. They both leave me to my thoughts for a little while. So that's why Potsdam doesn't believe in teaching wild seeds about ways they could lose their magic, I venture slowly. So all the freshman students that disappear, Potsdam just collects their magic and gives it to you? I'm sure she keeps some of it for herself, Aloysius says with a shrug, but I just shake my head. But why do you want their magic? They are untrained. Most of them haven't learned anything beyond a few basic spells. How could their magic possibly serve you? Because they're untrained, it means that their magic still exists in its rawest state, Hieronymous says softly. There's a lot that people can do with raw magic, including many unnatural applications. He keeps his voice level as he speaks, but I can tell he's hinting for me to read between the lines. Honestly, though, this is almost like something out of a horror movie. Aloysius was using the pure magic sucked from expelled Wild Seed students to stay alive and uphold his position, although apparently there was only so much magic you could take in. I'd have to check with Hieronymous to confirm my suspicions, of course, but it made sense. The only thing I didn't understand was why Hieronymous would go along with this. Surely he had to know about it. I thought he didn't want students to be harmed under his care, or perhaps he just felt that, considering no one was using the magic anyway, it wasn't wrong to send them back into the world without it, especially if someone preached it from a liability standpoint. Or, more troubling, maybe Hieronymous just didn't value the lives of Wild Seed children as much as magical ones. There were certainly people on campus who had that prejudice, but if Hieronymous did, it was well hidden from me. Even still, between this information and the knowledge of the memory spell experiments Aloysius had told me about earlier, I was wondering how much about Hieronymous I really knew. True, I went to bed with him every night, but how much does that really tell you about a person anyway?